How has this card not been banned? Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Now, today I wanted to mark the beginning of a brand new series that I'm calling Deckbuilding 101. Now, Deckbuilding 101 is solely going to focus on helping you guys build your decks, tailoring them to specific pieces of the meta, because I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make in the deck building process is while they're deck building, they're figuring out all the best cards that work together, all the different synergies that might work and all the cool combos and plays that their deck can do, but they're completely ignoring the fact that there's an entire meta that they need to take into account, and if the deck isn't built properly for the meta, then they're going to not have any success, or not have as much success as they might like to, solely because, depending on the circumstances of the meta, it just might not allow what their deck to do what they want it to do. So, I wanted to mark the first episode of the series with Zodiac Drident, because Zodiac Drident, as we can probably all agree, is one of the most oppressive monsters that we currently have to deal with in this format. And I find it really funny because if you think about it, if I were to tell you that there is a monster in 2017 that has a quick effect that has to target a face-up card and it destroys it, you would just laugh, because in some of the previous formats, we've had so many instances where cards that target are bad, cards that destroy cards are bad, and the fact that it has to be a face-up card in addition to that is just hilarious. But yet Zodiac Drident is still one of, if not the most powerful monster we're currently dealing with in our format. And the reason for that is because Drident just shuts down so many options, especially when you're looking at the meta itself. I mean, you got a card like Zodiac Barrage, which is a continuous spell, which Drident can pop before it triggers. You got Dragonic Diagram, which is in the exact same camp because it's a field spell, so Drident can pop it and make it so that it can't resolve. And then you also have the fact that Drident can pop a monster that you decide to normal summon, and if that monster that you normal summon has like an ignition effect, Drident can pop it before the ignition effect has a chance to activate, and then you're just completely shit out of luck. So there's so many instances where Zodiac Drident just shows its power, and it's just the fact that this card is basically consistently made on turn 1 no matter what you're playing against, assuming that they're playing the Zodiac engine in their deck, which if you're at any large-scale competitive event is going to be 90% of the meta, then it's something you really need to consider that you have to focus on handling in some form or another, otherwise your deck's not going to do what you want it to do. Zodiac Drident's presence in the meta essentially means that if you're going second, you're almost starting with one less card in your hand, because Drident is going to destroy something. Inevitably, it's going to destroy something. Unless you have a deck made of cards that Zodiac Drident is just unable to destroy or target or just something crazy like that, Zodiac Drident is going to hit something. Now, what's crazy about this is how consistently we can get Zodiac Drident onto the field, even if you look at the most minuscule of Zodiac engines. So let's take, for example, if you're running 2 copies of Rat Pier and like maybe 1 Whiptail, because people usually in a short condensed engine will just run 1 Whiptail just for flavor, and then you got your 3 Tenki and 3 Barrage. Now that might be a little bit excessive if you're trying to run a small engine, they might just play the Barrages, but even in that small 9-card engine, you still have a 72% chance to see Drident on turn 1, because it doesn't matter if you draw your Rat Pier, if you get any of those 9 cards, regardless of the ending board you're going to end on, Drident is going to be a part of that board, and this gets just taken to the extreme when you're looking at a deck like Pure Zodiac, because Pure Zodiac is running 2 Rat Pier, 3 Whiptail, 2 Ram, and 2 Thoroughblade. And obviously we're talking in the context of the post-June 12th ban list format, because this format's pretty much essentially wrapped up at the time of recording this video, and the Pure Zodiac lists are transitioning to a slightly heavier Zodiac build, just so they have a lot more monsters to work with, and plus since Norden's gone, they kind of need some slots to fill. So if you look at that, 2 Rat, 3 Whiptail, 2 Ram, 2 Thoroughblade, and then you still have your 3 Barrage and your 3 Tenki, you are looking at a 92% chance of starting with Drident going first. 92%. That is 92 out of 100 fucking games. So basically, you could go into a tournament that's like 8 or 9 rounds, and realistically, you could open Drident every single game. Going first or second, it's very possible that that is going to happen because of how consistently you're just able to slap a Drident onto any one of your Zodiac monsters, and it's absolutely insane. Now, going into YCS Seattle when Zodiacs first came out, I remember the RJB0 and I, we were talking about how oppressive of a card Zodiac Drident really was, and this is when Zodiacs first came out, and I really don't think people really realized at the time how powerful a card like Drident was, and we were actually focusing on how we're going to tailor our decks to handle Drident, because Drident essentially just stopped you from fucking playing the game, and if you can't handle Drident going second, then you're just not going to be able to play, or your plays are going to be so inoptimal that on your opponent's next turn, they're just going to fucking kill you. Mind you, this was still when Zodiac Rap here was at 3, because this is right when the deck came out. So, with that in mind, the RJB0 and I were laughing because we actually had an inside joke where we had so many ways to out Drident in our main and side deck combined that when we were going into games 2 and 3, if we were going second, we actually had a 98% chance to draw one card out of our opening 6 going second that we would be able to out the Drident. So we basically just did the math, and probability-wise says that we're going to have an out every time they have Drident. And that basically was the case, and that was ultimately our goal. So I think the biggest thing that what this comes down to is, how do we solve this problem? And how can you guys solve this problem in your deck building? Well, there's a couple different ways to do so. The first one I want to discuss is just pure resilience. So if you're building a deck that has cards that have built-in immunity to targeting effects, built-in immunity to destruction effects, or hell, even cards that gain effects when they're destroyed by other cards, especially your opponent's cards, then you don't really care as much about a card like Zodiac Drident because you're ignoring the problem altogether. This is decks like Magispectors, where Magispectors are all completely immune to the effects, so they don't have to worry about Drident, and they're a pretty solid answer because a lot of the time they can just run over the Drident anyway, and then if anything happens, then, you can always pendulum summon them back unless they get banished with Whiptail. There's also a deck like Cosmo, which has the same thing. The big ships are immune to targeting effects. The smaller monsters might not be, but the cool thing is they also have built-in resilience as well, because they can essentially get tagged out if they're ever threatened by the Drident, and then you can summon your big ship, or even another monster that just can run over the Drident because they only can use Drident once per turn, and then you're totally fine to go off from there. And then in terms of being destroyed, you've got cards like Yang Zing, which are seeing popularity in the dinosaur builds, so if one of your Yang Zing cards gets threatened, you can just float out something else, so it really doesn't matter if they pop it anyway. And then you've also got something like Burning Abyss, which, we haven't seen Burning Abyss really a whole lot this format, and for obvious reasons, but it's just another example of having that sort of resiliency against a card like Drident that can really kind of help counteract it. Now, I think the most common method to really handle Drident is just having immediate answers, and kind of like I was explaining in my story with the RJB0, having as many answers as possible is really the best way to go about it. These are cards like Forbidden Chalice, which has a lot of good utility, not just against Zodiac Drident, but a majority of the Zodiac deck as well, and not to mention a plethora of other cards because it's just effect negation, and sometimes that 400 attack boost can also come in handy as well. Then you've got cards like My Body is a Shield, which, although the Drident does have to target a monster for My Body is a Shield to function as you intend, My Body is a Shield does have dual purpose as well, because you can use it to protect yourself from board wipes or any other sort of destructive effect as well, so even if you don't use it on the Drident, you have it in case you need it, and if not, it just has another purpose that it can fulfill just in another role in that deck. And then you've also got the board wipes. This is very standard. You got your Gark Holes, you've got your Regeki, and then you've also got your Kaiju Slumbers as well. Kaiju Slumber's a little bit iffy because it can be negated by Ash Blossom, but if it goes off, it's still going to go off off very well. And then obviously, since we mentioned Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, you have your Kaijus. And especially, let's take a look at a deck like Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, thanks to a card like Overraptor, have a way to search a Kaiju, so being able to play a copy of Dogoron and then have it be searched out is really cool. Now, albeit, if you're going second, it's a little bit dicey because you're having to waste your normal to search the Dogoron. Drident's most likely going to pop the Overraptor if it gets to that point, but because once you search that Dogoron, they're going to have to pop something, otherwise it's just going to be gone thanks to the Dogoron. But in any case, it's a way to handle the Drident, and the more of these types of immediate answers you play, the higher the probability that you're going to be able to respond to their board and essentially be able to continue playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, the last section of cards I want to discuss are essentially Deterrence. Now, Deterrence are just cards that essentially prevent the Zodiac Drident from hitting the board in the first place. There is no better feeling than being able to go into your next turn knowing that your opponent does not have a Drident on the board. It is such a good feeling, and you just know that you can do whatever the fuck you want. This is where cards like Dimensional Barrier come in. Dimensional Barrier can be so effective in not only just stopping Zodiac Drident, but stopping all the Zodiac shenanigans as a whole. Then you've got cards like Flying Sea, which kind of fill a similar purpose, but what's cool about Flying Sea is that you can use it going second to be able to stop the Zodiac Drident from ever hitting the field. It is susceptible to cards like Zodiac Barrage and other destructive effects from essentially granting your opponent just free pluses, and they're still going to end on the Drident anyway. But if you think about it mathematically, the chance of them having a Barrage if they're playing 3 is the same chance of you having a Flying Sea if you're playing 3, and if you both have a 40 card deck. So if you want to look at it that way, I mean, the math is pretty even when it comes to it. Then you've also got cards like Ghost Ogre, because Ghost Ogre, when it's timed on a Zodiac monster before they have the chance to upgrade into the Drident, especially if they only have one, if they didn't go into the Rat Pier for some reason or another, then they're not going to be able to end on Drident at all, also assuming they don't have a Barrage, but still there is the possibility that can just completely end their turn. And then you also have a card like Maxi. Now, Maxi is a little bit of a tricky card because they're most likely going to end on Drident, but you're going to get more cards out of it, and so it acts as a deterrent because it's going to prevent them from generating advantage. But at the same time, if they decide to go balls deep and try to get, you know, as many cards as they want, that means you're going to have a higher probability of drawing more of your outs to stop their Drident when they ultimately decide to end on that Drident in the first place. And if anything, Maxi will just 1-for-1 itself out, because let's say you just drop it immediately on the normal summon of a Zodiac monster. Well, at the very least, you're just going to cycle through one card, so it's like you basically just played an Upstart Goblin during your opponent's turn. But ultimately, guys, Zodiac Drident is just such an oppressive card that I really just wanted to help you guys out and really just give you guys something to think about when it comes to your deck building in the future. I know this video is a little bit late considering the fact that, you know, we've pretty much had this going on since like February, but I feel that there are still people that when they're building decks, I don't care if you're building Zodiacs or True Dracos or fucking Ice Barrier Turbo, you need to have a way to deal with Drident if you want to compete, you know, realistically in any scenario, because it's something you're going to have to deal with one way or another, and really pleading ignorance on this is something that isn't going to work. We're going to be dealing with Drident for a very long time until it gets hit at some point, which I'm going to assume is going to be once we're in Link format and once Worlds happens and we get the newest ban list. I could be wrong, but I realistically think that's what's going to happen, and until then, I want you guys to just think of as many ways as possible to help you deal with Drident. But guys, that's it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoy this new segment. If you do, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.